I'll never forget the sound. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a low groan, like old wood straining under too much weight. But then it deepened, became a roar, and the earth gave way. The asphalt split open, swallowing a car whole in the span of a breath. 4 seconds. That's all it took for Greg Harper's SUV to vanish nose first into a jagged pit of dust and stone. Neighbors screamed, kids cried, phones lit up the dusk. And all I could think was, this didn't have to happen. I had warned them. I had begged them to see what was coming. But Karen, our neighborhood queen with her clipboard crown, had painted over my signs and laughed in my face. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 62 years old, a retired geotechnical surveyor. For 3 decades, I worked on projects where the earth itself was the enemy. Unstable foundations, shifting slopes, hidden caverns that could turn solid ground into quicksand. I thought I'd left that behind when I bought a modest house in Magnolia Ridge. Thought I'd finally earned a quiet life, with lawns trimmed like green carpets and neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs. But the soil was wrong. It was the first heavy rain that told me. I was walking back from the mailbox when I felt it. The ground beneath my boots didn't feel firm. It pulsed, just slightly, like the earth was breathing. I froze listening. Water pooled where it shouldn't, draining too fast into places I couldn't see. My training whispered the truth, sinkhole country. Beneath these pretty homes and manicured hedges, the land was hollow, a limestone sponge carved with invisible caverns. I knew it, and worse, I knew it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. I didn't want panic. I wanted safety, so I built a sign, not fancy, not permanent, just a bright orange board with bold black letters, danger. Unstable ground, stay clear. I drove the stakes deep 3 feet back from the soft spot, far enough that no child on a bike or dog chasing a ball would get close. I thought people would understand, but 2 days later the sign was gone. Not just gone, painted over. The orange drowned in beige, the letters erased, replaced with the words, "Keep Magnolia Beautiful." I found the broken stakes dumped on my porch, along with a notice from the HOA about unauthorized structures. I didn't need a signature to know who was behind it. Karen Harper. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, neon tracksuit, clipboard always clutched like a scepter. She ran Magnolia Ridge like her personal kingdom, barking at neighbors about lawn height and trash can placement. She didn't care about geology or soil reports. She cared about appearances, and in her mind, my sign was graffiti, an eyesore that threatened her curated image of suburban perfection. I tried reasoning with her. At the next board meeting, I brought reports, soil samples, diagrams, even photographs of fresh cracks spreading across the sidewalk. Karen smiled that tight plastic smile, tilted her head, and dismissed me with one line. Visually, the terrain looks fine. I wanted to shout that sinkholes don't care about appearances, that looks won't stop a street from collapsing. But I bit down hard and left the room with my papers still clutched in my hands. The next week, the HOA newsletter arrived. In cheerful fonts and pastel colors, it reminded residents that unattractive signage could result in fines. It was aimed directly at me. My blood pounded as I read it again and again. I had spent my career protecting people from disasters they couldn't see coming, and now I was being painted as the threat. And sure enough, the citation came. $75 for an unauthorized structure. My structure was a warning sign, a 2x4 with painted letters meant to keep people safe. Karen's war didn't stop there. She came by one morning, snapped a photo of my lawn, and hours later I received another citation for my rock border, the same one that had been there for years without complaint. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about silencing me. Neighbors started avoiding me, crossing the street instead of waving. I saw the way they whispered, the way their eyes flicked to me and then away. I wasn't Daniel the retired surveyor anymore. I was the crank, the problem, the man making trouble over nothing. For a moment I wondered if they were right. Maybe I was seeing ghosts in the soil, haunted by years of staring at cracks and slopes. Maybe Magnolia Ridge was safe, and I was the only one too scarred by the past to believe it. I almost gave up, almost tore down the warning, paid the fines, and let it go. But then I remembered the airfield in Honduras, collapsing under the weight of a transport jet because someone ignored the drainage reports. I remembered the village in Kentucky, swallowed overnight because warnings went unheeded. I remembered what my commanding officer told me once. The enemy isn't always a person. Sometimes it's the blind spot you refuse to see. And Karen was a blind spot big enough to bury a man whole, so I didn't back down. I dug deeper. I pulled old geological surveys from county archives, maps from the 70s showing limestone voids right beneath our streets. I logged photos, timestamps, even simple demonstrations with a marble rolling downhill where no slope should exist. Every detail went into a folder, cloud-backed and encrypted. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building a shield. And when the morning came that Greg's car disappeared into the earth, when the ground finally opened its mouth to prove me right, I was ready. Ready with every report, every photo, every sign Karen had painted over, but I wasn't ready for what came next. The morning after the sinkhole swallowed Greg Harper's SUV, the neighborhood looked like a war zone disguised as suburbia. Yellow tape coiled around the crater, flashing lights bounced off windows, and the air still smelled of dust and damp earth. News vans parked at the entrance to Magnolia Ridge, their antennas stabbing at the sky. I watched from my porch as city engineers in neon vests moved across the scene like ants, pointing, measuring, shaking their heads. But for all the chaos, my eyes were fixed on Karen. She stood at the edge of the crater, arms crossed, her face pale under too much makeup. Her husband had been pulled from the wreck, dazed and bloodied but alive. I thought maybe for once she'd see it. Maybe she'd understand why I'd tried so hard to warn them. But when her eyes lifted and locked on mine, I knew better. Her look wasn't gratitude. It was fury. That evening, a letter appeared on my porch. Official HOA letterhead, bold and cold. It accused me of soil sabotage and alarmist conduct, attaching a photo of me crouched near the cracked sidewalk with a marble in my hand. Suspicious behavior, they called it. Suspicious, for documenting the very collapse that nearly killed her husband. The absurdity of it made me laugh, but the bitterness in that laugh stuck in my throat. They weren't trying to find truth. They were trying to bury it. Karen doubled down. She went door to door, whispering about me, about how I was stirring panic and hurting property values. I saw blinds twitch as I walked past. Neighbors whispering on porches but falling silent when I neared. Some avoided me outright, steering their kids across the street as if instability in the ground was somehow contagious. And still, I kept working. Every crack that widened, every tilt in the pavement, every shift in the soil, I documented it all. I built a timeline, not just of the land, but of the fight itself. The letters, the citations, the painted-over warnings. I saved screenshots of the newsletter reminders, photos of my broken sign dumped on my porch, every piece of paper with the HOA seal stamped across it like a brand. The weight of silence pressed hard. Nights stretched long, and more than once I sat at the kitchen table staring at my folder, asking myself if it was worth it. If maybe I was cursed to see danger in every patch of dirt. But then I'd step outside, press my boot into the soft ground, and feel the hollow shift beneath me. No, I wasn't imagining it. I had spent my life respecting soil, listening to it. The ground here was speaking, and I couldn't let Karen's paintbrush erase its voice. When I uploaded my evidence, I did it quietly. I built a blog, Sinkhole Truth, Magnolia Ridge. I uploaded everything. Photos, reports, drone footage, even videos of me running marbles across the tilting sidewalk. No rants, no accusations, just data. I sent the link to a handful of neighbors, a few local Facebook groups, and the news station that had been filming when Greg's Lexus was swallowed. Within 48 hours, it spread like wildfire. Reporters called, emails poured in, and city engineers showed up again with ground-penetrating radar. For the first time, the silence broke. The whispers weren't just about me anymore. They were about Karen, about the HOA, about the warnings they had painted over and the lives they had put at risk. Karen tried to fight it. She released statements calling my blog misinformation. She held emergency meetings where she framed me as a bitter retiree with too much time on his hands. But the ground doesn't lie, and neither do the cracks spreading like veins across Magnolia Ridge. The pressure built until the HOA had no choice. An emergency town hall was called. Over 100 residents packed the clubhouse that night, the air thick with tension, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us like angry hornets. I stood in the back, folder under my arm, heart pounding. Karen walked in front, blazer pressed, voice steady as she began. She thanked people for supporting Greg, then pivoted, calling my blog a campaign of fear. But before she could continue, Denise from Lot 12 stood up. She held a stack of papers high and shouted, "You ignored his reports." "I saw the emails. The room shifted." Murmurs spread. Another neighbor yelled, "He put up a warning sign." "You painted over it," Karen snapped back, voice sharp, declaring the sign unauthorized, citing community standards. But then Paul, the same neighbor who once warned me quietly about Greg's route, spoke. His voice shook, but his words carried weight. "Standards? I watch that sidewalk crack every day. Daniel was the only one who tried to protect us." "And you tried to silence him," the dam burst. Voices rose. People stood, waving citations of their own, shouting about harassment and fines. Years of quiet resentment poured out in a single roar. Karen tried to regain control, waving bylaws like weapons. But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. By the time a motion to vote was called, the outcome was already written in the faces of the residents. Swift, unanimous. Karen was removed on the spot. She walked out stiff-backed, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. But I caught her eyes before she left. No smugness now, no victory smile. Just fear, and maybe finally recognition Karen's exit didn't end the story. Removing her was like pulling a thorn, but the wound she left behind ran deep. Magnolia Ridge was no longer just a neighborhood with white fences and manicured lawns. It was a valley that had swallowed its secrets, then spit them out into the daylight. The city engineers confirmed what I had feared. The land beneath our homes was unstable, riddled with hidden caverns and soft pockets. It wasn't sabotage, wasn't hysteria. It was geology, pure and simple. The HOA's silence had bought time, but at the cost of trust. And now, every neighbor looked at their yard with suspicion, listening for the groan of shifting earth. For me, vindication came with a price. Where others saw cracks and sinkholes, I saw memories of my father teaching me to read soil, of the pride in my family's valley, of the ground we worked and respected. Karen had tried to erase that legacy with paint, fines, and whispers. She failed, but in her failure she revealed something darker. The HOA wasn't just about lawns and dues. It was about control, about deciding whose truth was allowed to stand. When the valley claimed Greg's SUV, it wasn't just an accident. It was the land itself reminding everyone that no rulebook, no bylaw, no painted-over warning can silence the truth forever. I stood on my porch weeks later, watching as the last of the engineers packed up their equipment. The cracks were still there, scars across the earth, reminders of what we ignored. Neighbors passed me with nods now, some with sheepish apologies, others with quiet gratitude. For the first time in years, I felt less like a nuisance and more like a voice that had finally been heard. But the valley never forgets. It waits, patient and silent, teaching the same lesson over and over until people learn to respect it. And as I looked out across Magnolia Ridge, I knew one thing for certain. Warnings painted over will always find their way back to the surface. If this story kept you hooked, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter in these real American battles of truth, power, and survival. Share this video with a friend who knows the pain of being silenced. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stood your ground when everyone else tried to bury the truth?